Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and we have two guests with us today, Jeff Pasche and Willimina Montgomery, my partner in crime. Actually, partners in crime ways. How are you guys doing? Jeff, first, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing great, Mike. Glad to be included in your partners in crime. Very happy to be part of that category.
I feel sorry for you more than anything. And then we have Willimina, and Willimina's been on the show before. Willimina's my wife, and we're going to be talking about being an introverted real estate agent. And so 5 minutes ago, before we hit play, I just had a stroke of genius, which is my wife is an extreme introvert, and she should be on this show so she can talk to agents about what it's like to be an introverted real estate agent. So exactly what you shouldn't do to introverts is, hey, do you want to come on a podcast in 5 minutes and talk about your experience in real estate? And yeah, we had some conversations about that. But that's why we wanted to bring Willimina into this conversation as well. But as we're kicking off with this, I thought it might be worthwhile for us to first just indicate where we think we stand when it comes to introverted or extroverted or somewhere in between. So Jeff, let's start with you.
Well, it's a funny question because I've done so many Myers-Briggs indicators and DISC tests. And if you had asked me back in probably around 2014, 2013, I would have come up as mostly introverted, to be honest. But as of today, and as of the last few years, I would say I am much, much further in the extroverted category by far.
Okay. We got to talk about that because that's interesting. That's super interesting that you've noticed that change. Willimina, over to you.
Well, I can say that I am 100% introverted, always have been, probably always will be. And, there were many times when I thought that was a detriment in real estate. I really questioned whether there would be a fit because there's things that are more difficult when you're an introvert in real estate. But to answer your question, 100% in the introvert category.
Okay, awesome. So I think this is worthwhile, and I don't know where I stand, but I feel like I'm right in the middle somewhere because I tend to get a little overstimulated when I'm around a lot of people, but then I also go crazy when I'm not around people. So I feel like I have to be somewhere in the middle. But Jeff, let's first start with you. So what makes you say that you're now more extroverted and originally you were more introverted?
Well, when I was studying, like back in university, I was a library rat. Like I was in the library all the time, and I loved being there and just doing my work without anybody around. And really enjoyed like the solitude of that. Still needed people. I wasn't a complete hermit or anything, but I certainly over time just developed a deeper love for people and started to kind of come out of that. And now it's people and bigger groups and crowds are really what fuel my energy and provide me with energy every day. So yeah, it's been a funny transition, and learning about the different personality types, you do learn that a person can certainly shift around those blocks, and some people find themselves almost right in the middle. I've done these tests with larger groups of people where there was one gal I recall, and I think she was almost exactly right in the middle according to the tool. So it was really interesting. But for me, I think it was contextual, like the type of studying and the work I was doing called for more solitude and called for more time alone. Whereas this, of course, real estate often calls different things from us at times. So
totally, such a good point. And I think that Willimina, as we break into this is really the tug of war that you've experienced in your mind between, hey, I know that I'm an introvert. I know that I really value my solitude, but I'm also in this career that I think this kind of backslapping, gregarious extrovert is who I need to be. So walk us through some of the mentality that you had maybe early on in your career versus where you are now when you think through the concept of being an introvert in real estate.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when I first got into the industry, I had this vision of what a realtor looks like. And as you mentioned, that person is the classic salesperson who's, very quick-witted, very extroverted out there, talking to people, loves to be the center of attention. And that's kind of the mindset that I had of what I should be. So for the first few years, that's what I tried to emulate, and I tried to be like that. But one thing that I think a lot of introverts can relate to is because we often have to kind of act more extroverted. But if you do that too much and for too long, it can be extremely draining. You get really tired because you're kind of putting on a mask that's not really truly who you are. So over time, I'd say one thing that was very inspirational for me was I think in general, people started talking more about introvertedness. There's a book, Susan Cain's Quiet, The Power of Introverts. I think a lot of people are familiar with it, but I read that and I think that had a really big impact on how I viewed myself. And I started to realize that there's actually a lot of strengths to being an introvert in real estate. And one of those things being the ability to focus, listen to the client, so really understand a client, because I think sometimes a big part of our job when dealing with real estate clients is what they're saying is not always what they mean and what they feel. They don't even sometimes know what they want in a house or out of a sale, and sometimes they're confused. And so I think an introvert's ability to listen can truly draw that out, and they know what questions to ask and to dig a little bit deeper to kind of truly get to the client's motivations.
Good, really good point. And so you actually kind of realized that as your career progressed. And I guess to kind of set the stage, like you started off in your career, I think you kind of rose to a pretty high producing status fairly quickly, I would say, and then of course went up from there. So what has now changed now when you think of yourself as a real estate agent going out there selling homes? What goes through your mind when you're going and showing a home and you realize, hey, like I'm not necessarily going to be as talkative when I show a home or when I go to a listing presentation? What's the thought process that goes through your mind, or what's the inner voice saying?
For sure. I'd say the biggest change from starting out to now is confidence. I think confidence is very important for anybody, but especially introverts, because I think extroverts can kind of talk their way through. And yes, I'm looking at you, Mike. You can when you get caught off guard by something and something kind of throws you off, which often happens in real estate, or a situation comes up at a home inspection, you don't know really what's going on, or all these things that come up when you're not confident. As an introvert, it's hard to deal with those things because you're kind of caught off guard and you have to react on the spot. Whereas extroverts, I think, do that a little bit more naturally. And even when they're thrown into a situation like that, they can recover very quickly. So I find over time, what really has changed for me is confidence. And that confidence comes from knowing that I know the situation. I know how to fix the situation. I understand the problem, and I know how we can get to a solution. And that came with experience for sure, but I think as an introvert, it's very important to focus on your technical skills in the industry. Yes, you have to work on your people skills, absolutely, because you need to get the clients. But I'd say what creates that confidence for an introverted realtor is to build your skills. So the technical skills, whichever part that may be, focus on what you like. I mean, whether that's the statistics side of things, knowing every neighborhood stat, or maybe it's more on the actual house side, which is something that I really enjoy, is looking at a home, understanding the mechanics of a home, pointing out things that will come up at a home inspection, really having some solid knowledge when it comes to the houses themselves. So that's something that I found to be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think this idea of confidence. So confidence should transcend both extroverted and introverted. So you should be able to be a confident introvert or a confident extrovert. I think sometimes people think if I'm confident, that means that I'm outgoing somehow, or that I'm exuding. When you exude confidence, somehow that's an extroverted trait. But I don't think that is how it should be understood. I think an introvert, like Willimina's example, is perfect. She can be confident in the fact that she's an introvert, and she can be a confident introverted person. And that will draw, I think, clients that are also introverted, whereas an extroverted person may not reach those same kind of people in the same way. So I think an introverted person can hit a demographic differently than an extroverted one, which is why they're both so necessary in the industry.
That's a good point. Yeah. What were you going to say, Willimina?
Well, I was going to say, and yeah, that's a good point, Jeff, because often we're dealing with couple. That's a very common client scenario, and a lot of times opposites attract. I find in relationships, and not always. I mean, sometimes you get two very extroverted people or two very introverted people, but often you have one of each, and that's something that Mike and I have found is when we work with people, it's sometimes one person is more drawn to Mike's style, and sometimes somebody's more drawn to my style. And yeah, that's a very good point, Jeff. I think people tend to relate better to certain people. Yeah, and sometimes that's more on one side of the introversion extroversion scale or the other.
And how did you overcome that doubt that you internally or your mind was telling you that, hey, I need to be an extrovert in order to sell a lot of real estate, and then now it's very clear, just based on this conversation here, you don't believe that at all. How did you actually start to overcome that doubt that you needed to be an extrovert to sell at a high level?
I would say trial and error. Going through, I think the first few years in real estate, I did have many moments where I thought, okay, is this the right career for me? Like, should I be doing something like researching something, or, I have an economics degree. Should I be looking at stats all day? But, and actually I did a lot of research on it, because that's one thing introverts love to do is research. And I did a lot of reading online about strengths or about introverted real estate agents, and that really gave me a lot of confidence too, because there are a lot of examples of introverts doing really well in all sorts of sales industries, but in real estate specifically, because real estate is if you take it is a sales job, but it really isn't when you break it down further, because you're helping people buying and selling their home, which is a huge part of their life. So you're the other aspects of matchmaking, like figuring out what that client's looking for, helping them throughout, listening to them with empathy, understanding their needs and problem solving, and all those things. A lot of that isn't really related to, you don't need to be an extrovert to do those things well. And so really for me, it came down to reframing what I thought of myself and how I could help people best. And rather than trying to think about what I don't have, which skills I'm not good at, I doubled down on the skills I do have, which is, those detail-oriented research task and listening skills, and really focusing on developing those. And that really built my confidence and said, hey, I can do this career as an introvert. And it's, yeah.
Because I do think modern sales is not about convincing somebody, it's about identifying needs. And generally speaking, introverts are a lot better at identifying needs. And I think even you and I, Willimina, because we've worked together for so long, like I will work with a client for a certain period of time, and then you'll go and take them and go out shopping with them. And before you know it, they're into a house. And this is something that's gone through my mind before, is like, sometimes I'm not very good at moving somebody through a process. That's an area where I could use a lot more, I could put a lot more attention, because a lot of times I'm just focused on like having a good time when you're out showing properties, but that's not really the most effective approach. And honestly, like, although we may have a good time doing the odd showing, they're there to buy a house, and it's not to say that I should be pressuring them or that you pressure them. I think you just have the ability to identify really what's important to them and then match them with the appropriate home or ask the appropriate questions. I think introverts should be very focused on a couple of things. One is their ability to ask questions, because they naturally have that ability. And second, I think, is also written communication, because introverts are going to naturally be drawn more to texting and emailing over picking up the phone. And I think in a sense, like, yeah, there's always times where you have to pick up the phone, but I also think introverts should own the fact that they can become very good at written communication. And frankly, most of our communication in this day and age is written. Yeah. Another actually interesting thing that comes to mind for me, what you were mentioning, and I don't watch this show, but Selling Sunset, I think his name's Jason I want to say Oppenheimer, but I know that's a movie. So I know I'm mispronouncing his name, but everyone who watches Selling Sunset's going to know who I'm talking about. But anyways, when he got into real estate, I read this in a book that I'm reading right now. He thought he was a really bad salesperson. He didn't think he was very good at sales at all. So what he decided was he was going to double down on understanding construction. Like, he was going to understand construction and design of a home extremely well, and he was not going to focus on other elements. If somebody brought a commercial deal to him, he would refer that out instantly. But he was going to know everything about construction. And that was really something that unlocked a lot of business for him, because then people started to say, hey, this is the guy you need to go to if you're building a nice luxury house. And I think that introverts can really lean into what they know and what they do well. And some of us, maybe on the more extroverted side, we could probably learn a lot from that too.
Yeah, and I think that's really like the crux of the conversation is, if you are introverted, what are the things that maybe, what are the skill sets that you could be developing that you don't have as a default? And as an extrovert, what are the skill sets that we could be grappling with? Like you said, Mike, walking someone through a process a little bit more precisely than we do, because I'm like you, I just want to have a great time and get to know people and buy a house together. But often we actually should, in if nothing else than serving the client, getting a little bit more specific about what it is we're looking at and pointing things out and so on. And so I think it's important that both sides of that, both are, you're confident in the skills you have and you utilize them to the nth degree, but that you don't also forget that, maybe Willimina decides to go out of her shell somehow where she normally wouldn't, or something like that. And conversely, like for me, I know that in the beginning I was much more detail oriented. I've become much more people friendly, and I know that one of my faults is that I don't go through everything with the finest tooth comb that I probably could, because I'm so focused on the relationship building aspect of the thing, because I'm a little more outgoing. So I think that's really important, and that if there's introverts out there that may see the title of this and want to listen to this, that it's not to be fearful that you're an introvert and couldn't do this job. I think you have so much to offer, and that there's so much to learn. And I think that's where the fun of the job comes in, is that you know who you are, and yet you keep learning. Like you keep developing the sides of you that you don't have by default. And I think that's the challenge, and that's kind of the exciting part of this conversation.
That's a really good point, Jeff. And I think at the essence of that is starting out is, I think, you have to know yourself. I do talk to some agents sometimes that, they kind of struggle because you get into the industry and you kind of, they don't always know their strengths. And so I think starting with a little bit of introspection to think, okay, what am I good at? Where do I fall on this introversion, extroversion scale? Because it's very much, it's not a black or white, one or the other. Like a lot of people fall somewhere in between. And so figuring out where you naturally fall. So there's your natural style. And then there's also kind of your learned behavior, and figuring out your strengths and developing those strengths, using them to your advantage. But then you do, as a real estate agent in general, you do need to be well-rounded in a lot of ways. I mean, we always talk about how we wear so many different hats, right? There's so many different skill sets required to be a successful agent. So yeah, absolutely. For both sides, you do need to kind of work on your work on those areas that you're not as strong. And sometimes that means hiring it out. For instance, for people who this is more for the extroverted people who may not be as good at those details or paperwork, maybe you hire an assistant to help with that so that you can do more being out there with people. But yeah, as an introvert, I mean, you got to practice your small talk. Us introverts hate small talk, but I've become really good at chatting about the weather and all sorts of other little details that, you just need to kind of still be personable when you're out and about with clients. But yeah, make it personal. Like, figure out ways to connect with somebody on the basis of something that you're into. So for instance, I really like dogs. And so that conversation is often something interesting when I meet clients. They tell me about their dog, and, we go through the home and like, oh, this would be a great yard. The fenced yard will be great for your dog. And you have that conversation that continues that way, because that's something that introverts do like is a little bit deeper connection with people, and rather than just surface talk. So, there's ways to grow that skill for sure.
Yeah, and I think, if we take it back to the beginning, I think, and I know I mentioned a couple of things like the Myers-Briggs. One of the things I would encourage any new agent, or maybe even if you've been in it for a number of years, do one of these career-specific Myers-Briggs type tools, because it will sometimes we don't want them to be self-fulfilling prophecies. Like we don't want them to say, well, because I'm extroverted, I can never be introverted, or vice versa, because a tool told me so. But I think that if you can look at those things objectively, they can be super helpful in leaning into your strengths. So because I'm extroverted, because I like to put myself out there a bit more, I know that video and social media and putting myself out on a limb sometimes, and sometimes in the spotlight is where I do my best work. But I would only have known that had I done certain indicators that affirmed that. And if it's other types of skill sets, then in your business, what are the types of lead generating things that I can be doing that lean directly into my skill sets that will help me, move forward, sort of thing.
That's a really good point. And I think one of the next topics that we should get into is the concept of lead generation as an introvert. But right before we jump into that, as we kind of wrap up this concept of helping clients as an introvert, I would say that like there is strengths and weaknesses to being an introvert or an extrovert. And we've already discussed them. Usually it's detail orientedness when you're more extroverted, and usually it's, hey, you're going to have to connect with people if you're introverted. You may not love it, but you still have to put yourself in that position. But I've been in this interesting position where I've helped clients before, and then Willimina's jumped in and done showings, and then I've jumped back and done showings, and I've asked them, like, how was your showing with Willimina? Now, they're probably not going to say, she was awful, because they know that we're married, and that wouldn't work very well. But there's one thing that almost every client will say to me. And so I know that there's definitely some truth to this. I generally ask, well, how'd the showings go? And they will always say, she is so detailed. She doesn't miss anything. And then all that goes through my head is, Mike, you're clearly not that, because they've had that. They've had you, and now they get her. So Willimina, can you walk us through, as an introvert, you're showing a home. Of course, you're talking about the weather, you're talking about dogs, and that's pushing you out of the comfort zone to have these small talk conversations. Now you're opening the door and you're going through the home. What are you focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a little bit of small talk, but then I kind of become all business, but and maybe that's not for everybody, but my real focus going through the home is, and I tell people this off the start, but I let them know that, hey, I'm going to point out anything that I see that I know will come up on a home inspection. And I do that with the understanding it's not just to deter, like I'm not actively trying to deter them from buying the home, but I'm trying to educate them going through. That way, a lot of times it takes several homes. We're going through quite a few homes altogether. But if you don't have these conversations off the start, I found they end up looking at 10 homes, putting in an offer, getting to the home inspection, and all of a sudden a minor thing comes up in the home inspection. They're like, oh, wow, this is so scary. And they get so scared because they have never heard about this thing before. And now they're in this transaction and they're already this far, and now they're really scared and nervous. So I like to have a lot of these conversations beforehand. Examples, the basement's a great place. Spend a lot of time there. We go into the utility room. I talk about the furnace. We talk about the age. We talk about the maintenance. Then we have a look at the plumbing systems. Poly B plumbing's a big one. We have a lot of 90s homes, and kind of educating them on those things. Other things that I go through are talking about maybe there's cracks in the wall or in the floor in the basement, and talking about which ones matter, which ones are normal, and going through, and we kind of have a conversation about all of those things. And it really, especially first time home buyers, I find, who are new to home ownership, who don't know any of these things, they can be, they're really interested in those things, and it makes them feel more educated by the time they do find a home. Other things, outside, we look at the exterior. I try to look at a home the same way that I would look at it as if I was purchasing it myself. And Mike can vouch for the fact that I take a long time, but I'd rather take a little bit of extra time, go through it, and then also get a feel for, as we're going through, how suitable the home is for that person or people, and trying to understand, the layout, what's important to them. When I'm in the home, I know a lot of people, or maybe not a lot of people, but I think a lot of agents do focus more on having fun with the client, and I think that's great, but that's not my style. Personally, I'm more about that educational and conversational, but yeah, it's very much all business when we're in the house.
And I think both ways work, right? Jeff, maybe walk through your process. There's probably some overlap, but what are some differences, I guess, when you're showing a home compared to what Willimina brought up and how you do it?
Yeah, I took a bunch of notes, Willimina. That's really good stuff. I like that. Definitely very thorough, and I think that speaks volumes. For me, I try to get out of people's way when I'm in the house, at least in the beginning. So I let them experience the house with their own eyes before I put my eyes on it, generally. So, and then I will meet them in various rooms, and then I will point out things in that particular room if there's anything either positive or negative. Is there staining on the fan in the bathroom? Is there anything that we can see there? Is there any moisture? Definitely the HVAC and things. But I step in and I step out. So I step out because I tell people I don't want to be your shadow. So experience the home, look through it, and I'll meet you periodically throughout your sort of showing. And at that time I point stuff out. But I would say I try to read their emotions. So if they are, and again, this is maybe the extroverted or who knows, whatever part of me is doing this, but I'm trying to read their emotions so that I can either affirm their excitement, because I have found that if I'm looking at it, so the one difference I think with Willimina and I would be, I don't look at it like if I were buying the house, because I may absolutely hate the house. And that bias, if it comes through, of course, we don't want to deter people. I've had people buy houses that I cannot believe they've purchased, and vice versa, right? So I will try to affirm their excitement because it's their house and they're buying it, or I will affirm some of the things that I know that gives them sort of angst or anxiety, and I will try to smooth it out. It doesn't always work. I mean, so I guess the main thing is, yeah, I step in and I step out sort of as needed, whether it's technical or whether it's psychological, right? And that's kind of how I do most of my viewings, my showings.
Geez, I really have a lot to learn. I feel like I'm making every mistake in the book after hearing your guys' fantastic process. But you know what I think that exercise is interesting is because we have two differing personality types showing homes in different ways, both producing at very high levels, getting clients to a result that they want, which I think should give everybody a lot of confidence that there is really no one size fits all. And that's generally why sometimes when people want to know about like scripting and stuff like that, I'm a little bit more against the concept of scripting and this sort of like, this is the process, because there are so many ways that we can approach this. But I think both of you did things in common. One thing you guys both said is you're there to educate them and point things out. And so I think regardless of whether you're introvert or extroverted, we need to be there to guide them through this and point them out. And then both of you also said you're looking to identify their needs in comparison to the home that you're going through. And you guys go about it in different ways, but you're getting to the same result, which I think was really interesting. What about now when we shift this conversation from actually servicing the client? Because I do think that part of me thinks that introverts are better at servicing clients than extroverts. And not to be hard on Jeff and I here, but I agree. Yeah. Like if I wanted an agent to help me in a different city, I would probably want the introvert. And that's because I know that they're going to listen to me. It's going to be a lot more one-on-one. They're going to hear me. They're going to ask me questions. So I think at servicing the client level, introverts have a distinct advantage. I think they truly do. Now let's shift the topic here towards prospecting and generating new leads. And I think that this is
a nightmare.
Yeah, I know, but this is part of the conversation.
And I wish I could do it 24/7 and not do anything else, right?
Yeah.
The two of you could do that all day long, but this is the part where I think introverts have, and I can't speak for every introvert out there, but personally, this is the part that, getting new business, especially, I think introverts are great at working with their network, their sphere of influence, people they already know. As an introvert, we don't always love big events, for instance, like networking events. I did try to do some of those at the beginning of my career, and I dreaded them a little bit. I really did. I had a hard time just making those connections in a big group setting. I think a lot of introverts prefer one-on-one communications, So I don't think you have to do one or the other in real estate. I think you can double down on the things that work for you. So one-on-one relationship building, I think, is a very good way for an introvert to build their business. But you have to go deeper. I think if you're going to do one-on-one, rather than if you're not meeting with a whole bunch of people, you have to go deeper with that one person. So you actually have to cultivate that relationship, and maybe that person is a business owner themselves, is figure out ways how can you help that business grow, and then they will want to return that favor and help your business grow. And other ways are to get out there and do things you enjoy doing, and build your network that way, whether it's hobbies, sports, whatever that interest is. But I don't think you have to necessarily it's okay to push your comfort levels and step outside your comfort zone, but if there's certain things that just don't fit with you, then you don't have to do that, but make sure you have something else to make up for it.
So I have a question for you, Willimina. I'm just curious. And so, like, do you think that building it one-on-one, because I love that part of it. That's probably where the introverted part of me does shine, is the one-on-one stuff. Do you think you could scale a business just as quickly without doing the mass extroverted things? You'd have the same quality of business, the same quality of client, but do you think you could grow as fast with an introverted model as opposed to an extroverted? That's kind of the elephant in the room, right? I think that's where people think, so I just pose it, and I don't know the answer to this, but I just pose it to both of you, just for your opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I guess it's hard to know for sure, because if you do it one way, you don't know how it would go another way. I guess in terms of, let's clarify, how would you describe an extrovert's way of growing a business? Like bigger things, like what are some things that, so that we're all on the same page?
Yeah, for example, so if you're, let's say you're part of like 4 different volunteer groups, you're part of 3 drop-ins, you're doing cocktail parties, you're going to B&I, things, you're really doing the social aspect, and you're talking about yourself and real estate in all of these contexts all the time, as opposed to maybe 1 thing or 2 things you're involved with, where maybe 5 times out of 10 you're talking about real estate, or maybe 50% of the time. But those times are like very intentional, and they're quality, and you're gonna get a client almost every time doing that. Yeah. Could you scale it the same way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'd say, because what I'm kind of picturing is let's say that I'm new to real estate, and I have 50 people that I know well enough to reach out to. Okay, I don't know if that, we'll say 50 people, but the way that I see that as an introvert, if rather than having 10 of those people over for a party, instead, maybe I don't like those parties, and I'd rather spend time going through each of those people on my list, and actually, like, maybe I research a little bit, maybe I have a look at their social media, see what's been going on in their life. Then I reach out, and truly try to connect with that person. Say, hey, how have you been? How's your, I see you're have been going back to school. Well, how's that going? Like, I'd love to learn more about that. Do you want to grab a coffee? That kind of thing, the one-on-one. I think there's a lot. And then when you go out for that coffee, you talk about how, oh, hey, I'm in real estate now, and you connect, and you get to know each other, and then you keep in touch after that. So I think that's a very good way to get business, but it's of course a longer term thing again. But it's hard to say. I do think, when it comes, because I think the things you mentioned were, a lot of those were, like, in a way they're not like completely large scale, in the sense that, like, for instance, an example, like posting something just on social media. I think, yes, you have a big reach of a lot of potential people that see it, but it's not necessarily personalized. So, if you have an audience of 500 on social media versus reaching out to 25 people like one-on-one, I don't know. I would think that reaching out to the 25 people one-on-one has a bigger impact than posting to 250 people. But my views may be biased. I think this is $1 million question for sure. But that's my personal feeling.
Yeah. But like, another kind of point to this is, like, why are we going to these big networking events? And actually, we'll preface this by saying I've dragged you to networking events, Willimina, kicking and screaming, like kicking and screaming. But you've came at times, but then I generally tend to keep going, and then you say, oh, I'm done with that. So you have, I think, stayed quite true to your personality type. But like, let's think about these networking events. We go to networking events for what purpose? So that we can meet a person one-on-one. Like, I'm not going to, unless I'm doing like a speaking engagement or something, you're generally going, and there might be a lot of people around, but you're trying to meet individual people so that you can then bring that person into your database eventually and have a relationship with them. So what you're saying, Willimina, is skip the heavy lifting of going to these events that I don't like, and let's double down on the people that I already know, spend time with them. But I think there's another piece to this is if you're going to provide a higher level of service, I'm not saying that as an extrovert you don't provide a high level of service at all, because then we'd be making fun of ourselves here, Jeff. But I do think that introverts, like the level of care that you provide to the client stimulates more referrals. So as you're getting very one-on-one with somebody, you tend to get more referrals because of the high quality work that you do and because of the close relationships that you have. Like there's a few people I'm just thinking through in our database right now that will send a ton of referrals, like an absolute ton of referrals, an abnormal number of referrals from just a few people. And a lot of those people are people that you have close connections with.
Yeah, and maybe, you know what, it's almost better to ask it this way, because I totally agree. I think the reason we go to them is so that we can meet those people. Let's say you talk to 100 people. It doesn't really matter unless you're actually following up and doing the one-on-one thing and personalizing your interactions with them after that event. I think that's an important point. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if you're going at all. But let's say you're in a brand new city. You don't know anybody. How does an introvert, so like Willimina, if you were plopped into right, this question we always get asked, right, that Mike and I have talked about. But as an introvert, because Mike and I could probably answer that and say, well, we would go to this, right? But as an introvert, where that may not be the first default thing, how would you meet people in order to start scaling those personalized relationships?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I think as an introvert in a new city, there are some obstacles to overcome. I think extroverts will have a little bit easier of a time with it being in a new city because they're naturally going to be more comfortable stepping outside their comfort zone. But as an introvert, I think you have to start somewhere. So I think having a bit of that mindset of, okay, I'm going to have to be a little bit more extroverted for the next little while in order to make those new connections in a new city. But you can still do it in a way that's true to your nature. So one of those things is to focus on your own interests, and whether that's a sport or hobby. That's how I built a big network. Was I played volleyball, and so connections through that lasted many years. And I think if you move to a new city, like let's say you're really you love running, which is kind of a solitary sport. Let's say you enjoy running, but maybe you, instead of running by yourself, maybe you join a running group. There's lots of meetups that are catered towards all sorts of interest, whatever your odd interest may be. It can be a very introverted activity, but there's meetups where you can meet other people doing that same activity, and then pushing yourself to get out there and trying to actually make some connections at those things. So there you do have to put yourself out there for sure. But I think that's a great way to build some new connections.
I never would have thought you played volleyball. You're so short, Willimina. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense now. Yeah.
It does. The height makes sense. Yes.
The height makes sense. No, I'm just kidding.
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I think it touches on a good point. Like as an introvert, just because it's a little bit more challenging, probably initially, to get out and start doing these things, I think really what's at the heart of this is it doesn't mean you can't build a massive, wildly successful business. Maybe you give yourself a little bit more of a runway. You give yourself a little bit more time because you know you're going to need it ultimately. And Willimina is a testament to this. You can build a huge, massively successful real estate business as, like, on the scale of introvert to extrovert, you would be in like the 99th percentile probably of on the introverted side, right? And you've been able to do it. So it's very, very doable. But before we end, I think it's worthwhile for us to chat about some of the challenges as an introvert and how we approach those. So Willimina, maybe you can speak to some of those.
Yeah, and this is something just that I've personally found. One of the biggest challenges is that real estate is just such a fast moving and unpredictable career. So many introverts, like myself, we really value kind of knowing ahead of time what's going to happen. And that's something that you don't get in this career. And I think it's challenging for any person in this career, especially when we've had this busy market the last few years. But in general, I mean, your day can very quickly change and your priorities often change. You may have planned a day, or, hey, I'm going to do content. I'm going to catch up on my paperwork and I'll reach out to some clients. but then you get a phone call and you need to drop everything and get into a showing, because if you don't, your buyer is going to miss out on that property. So personally, that's one of the biggest things that I've struggled with is that that chaotic schedule that real estate brings. Plus having to kind of be on 24/7. Like, I know you don't have to be on 24/7 per se, but you don't always know when a client's going to reach out, and it will often be evenings and weekends. So personally, I've struggled with that, but there are some things that I've come up with to help. And it's being really strict with your own schedule, and trying to time block a little bit more. So one thing that I try to do is I really try to avoid any meetings, showings, appointments, anything before noon. I keep that morning time for a time where first, having my own time in the morning before I actually start work, to exercise, walk the dogs, things like that. But then having the morning as time to get the work done that I need to get done, and then appointments can be done in the afternoon and evening. And you can't always stick to that 100%, because sometimes you have that client with a tricky schedule, and of course then you have to be flexible. But it's really setting some boundaries, I think, is what it comes down to, and communicating those boundaries to clients as well. So saying these are my hours during which you can reach me, and outside of those hours, send me an email unless it's urgent. Of course, when it's urgent, we have to be available all the time. But a lot of times you get questions that don't have to be dealt with at that time. So I think especially for an introvert, because we get more drained by the constant chaotic schedule and client requests. So carving out some time and setting some boundaries and really trying to stick to that. I think that's a really important thing, just to build in that recharge time.
Yeah, it's funny that because being pulled in a million directions is what I love about real estate. But it's funny because I have to create the boundaries knowing that I can't sustain that. And you're creating the boundaries to make sure you don't get crazy, right? And I find that I just find it really interesting, the different experiences that we have.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about this is ultimately there's no real one size of real estate agent. There's a variety of different ways that you can go out and you can produce, and you can produce at a very high level. And what I'm learning a lot from this conversation is this concept that there is a lot of power in being an introvert, and there's a lot of benefits to being an introvert and how you take care of clients. And instead of shying away from that and trying to lean into being an extrovert, although at times, yes, we have to get out of our shell, and at times extroverts need to be a little bit more detailed. Ultimately, we need to see this as a superpower. We need to see this as a superpower to help clients move through a process. Yes, lead generation might be a little bit more taxing for us. That might be the harder thing, but we are going to be in a much better position with introverts helping clients through this process. And lead generation can very, very much be done, and you can get to an extremely high level as a real estate agent. So thank you both for coming on, sharing your experiences. I think it's really helpful to have one strong extrovert and one strong introvert, both that were able to reach very high levels of production. So it can definitely be done on either side of the spectrum.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mike.